Shalom, brother and sister truth seekers. Time has come. I was waiting to see if I would get any last minute submittals, but I think the dust has finally settled, and so I'll talk about everything that we saw from this past Equinox event, and thank you to everyone who participated. I'm sure you were blessed and you learned something. I know I did, even after all these years, still learning. Every time we've read the Bible before, but we keep reading it, and I hope we're reading it with an expectation that he's I every time we read it, he's gonna reveal something new to us. I mean, there's a verse about that. His word will not return void, and I believe every time we get into the word, he's gonna have something for us. We might not know it in that moment, but he will. And it's the same way with all this sundial stuff. Like, as we are seeking him, uh, he's going to help us to see things from a different perspective, or that we might not have thought of before, and or show us a better way to do things as we practice. It's the same thing. We're seeking him and his truths, and he's going to meet us halfway, and I've just seen it time and time again, and I saw it this time around. So don't listen to the lies of the enemy that we don't need to dig into this stuff. It is good to, the more practice, the better. The more time you spend in the Word, the better. The more time you spend hands-on learning about your Creator, the better. So just to fly through this, so it's going to be important to talk about what happened this past March briefly. These green lines signify the zone that we think the Creator's International Dateline may have landed back in March. Like, this man-made international dateline is false. The Creator's true international dateline, where the solar cycle restarts itself, where it ends and restarts itself, as some people call that Takufa, but it's the beginning and end of the solar cycle, and it's shifting every year. It's not in the same place every year, and that's just because currently it seems we do have an odd number of days in the year. It's like 365.2-ish days, and it's because of that 0.2-ish days. Like, if the sun began its circuit here at this location, after 365 days, the sun returns to this point, but then it needs an extra 0.2 days to advance and complete the solar circuit, that north-south shifting of the sun. And so the Creator's International Dateline, or the beginning of that solar cycle, is advancing. It should be moving as long as the solar cycle is more than 365. It seems like it should be moving forward. Like, when you get to 365 and boom, it's there. As long as it's more, it seems like it should be moving forward. I suppose if there was ever a possibility it would get less, you might see it move backwards, but as long as it's more, it seems like we should be looking for it to progress this way. And so this past spring, in March, it was tough to figure out where the Creator's International Dateline was. We figured it might be somewhere around here based on past data. We were actually excuse me, we were wondering if it might be a year where everyone was on the same Gregorian date, because maybe the Creator's International Dateline was going to land near the man-made International Dateline this past spring. But it didn't seem to do it. It was close, but it did seem like we had a solid witness from Alan in Eastern Australia. And that's important for us to understand, and when we look at the data from this fall, because this was pretty solid. Alan had 10 hours of data, and I forget if he was seeing the straight line or the curve, but it kind of, he was the last person to see the straight line, I believe. And so we were expecting things to follow suit, and somewhere in this zone from green to green is where we, unfortunately, there were a lot of new truth seekers with sundials in this neck of the woods last spring, and it was just couldn't say 100% any closer than what I'm showing here. This green bar was actually over here until we received an updated data set from a gentleman in France who just had an excellent data set. And so, I mean, I felt it was solid enough to move this bar to this location. But between here and here, we didn't have enough data from this region of the world to say who was seeing the straight line first or last in this area. So as we come around to this fall, one thing that's important to keep in mind is we did have a solid witness from last spring here. And so we do expect the first person, based on the pattern, if it is truly 365.2 days, then it is still 0.2 days, then we would expect to see the pattern progressing this way. So the first person to see the straight line would be, in theory, to the west of this location. And so that, again, that's important as we get into some of this, because there was a close call in Australia this year, hard to tell. And but I think when you compare it to the solid witness from earlier this year and the predictable pattern of the sun, it seems we can still zero in a little bit closer on where the international dateline will be this spring. So without further ado, just going to explain this system again. So if it's a solid green cell, I did that to signify that someone had 10 hours of data, and there wasn't anything funny with the data, and it was a very solid data set. And so there were 3 of those this time around. I did flag some people's data with this green text, which signifies they had 9 or more hours of data, and I didn't see anything funny, and it it should be reliable data. It's just the we've, in doing this all these years, we've been learning it's just best to have more data around the equinox. Like 10 hours of data is really a minimum we try to encourage people to get, because it's just so clear. You can tell very clearly which day the shadow is curved one way and which way it's straight and which way it's curved the other way. It's when people only have 8 hours of data, and I've seen this, and if you want to see specific examples, I can point you to specific data sets where you can see this. But when people get like 8 hours of data around the time of an equinox event, I've definitely seen where the days straddling an equinox event the data can look straight, because unfortunately they only had 8 hours of data, and the shadow pattern hooks the most in the early morning and the late evening. So when you miss those early morning and late evening points, it can look straight for a few days in a row. And actually, there is a data set in here we might take a peek at where you see it's a shorter spread of data and it looks straight, but unfortunately that can definitely happen. I've seen that happen. So yeah, I just 9 hours seems to be okay, but 10 hours is really like no questions. If there wasn't anything funny going on, that's a very clear solid witness. But I do flag some of these in green text to say it's definitely something to consider. Not totally solid, but definitely good to consider. And I flag them in red if they're like a big outlier, like they didn't match the pattern of what we were seeing from people around the world. Like once somebody sees the straight line, then in theory everybody to the west should be seeing the straight line. And if someone doesn't, then I flag that in red. And there were no people this year who were in disagreement with one another's data that I could tell, but I did see something interesting happening with Stellarium that I can briefly mention at the end of this video. But just to try and get through this, and this data that I'm going to show, the pictures, it's all available actually in this link here, and there will be a link for this Dropbox folder in the description below this video. You can take a look at all these pictures closer for yourself and come to your own conclusion. You know, if you disagree with any of this, you can take a look for yourself and make your own educated decision. And if you have questions about anyone's data specifically, reach out to me at this email, avoiceoftruthandlove@gmail.com, or this Facebook group, Solar Tracking Observations Confirming the Creator's Time via Genesis 1:14, and I can get you in touch with these people who are collecting data if you have a question specifically for them. So it started, I think we're going to start with Angie in the Isle of Wight and in the UK. And it's important to start with her because she saw the pre-equinox curve on the 21st with 9 hours of data. Okay, so this is a solid witness for the pre-equinox curve, and so we're going to mark that. And as we move west, we would expect more people to see the pre-equinox curve. And we come to me in West Virginia, and on the 21st, I saw the pre-equinox curve with 10 hours of data, so I was very confident about that. And so as we continue west, we didn't get any more reports. We had a witness from Azure in Australia, and his data set was questionable. Unfortunately, it was 8 hours or 7.5 hours, and there was a question of the first data point being reliable or not. And so when you rule it, the first data point out, we'll look at it, but it kind of looked straight, but unfortunately it was only 7.5 hours. And so I actually had a meeting earlier today with the Covenant Calendar Club where we were discussing it specifically, but this is where I say it's important to compare to last spring in March. Like, and if the solar cycle is 365.2 days, maybe it will change in the future. But if it is, we should be seeing the pattern move forward. Or to the west, because we did have a solid witness in Australia this spring. So it was a close call for this one in Australia, but based on all that, I do think it was probably, unfortunately, just a case where it looked straight for lack of those extra hours of data collection. That's what I'm thinking. But totally, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Anything is possible later in March. So this is just to kind of give us an idea, but based off of just trying to share a little bit of an experienced opinion here. Again, you can look at all the data for yourself, but I think that's what was probably going on. So then moving on, it was Isle of Wight saw pre-equinox curve on the 21st. I saw it on the 21st. You go around and you hit this man-made international date line, and the date shifts to the 22nd. So the sun's coming this way, 22nd, 22nd, and the first person to see the straight line was Wendy in Australia, South Africa. So Wendy right here, and she had 9.5 hours of data on the 22nd. She saw a straight line. So that's pretty solid. It's not the 10 hours, but 9.5 is pretty good. And so this is a marker that I put here. So these gold orange lines are the zone that I think the Creator's international date line was for the fall. The green ones were the zone where we thought it could be based off of the March data. And then these orange ones are from the fall equinox that we just had, the September equinox. So I put one bar here because this really should be the minimum. Like it can't go backwards because of the solid witness we had in the prior spring. So it has to be advancing somewhere in here. And we know Wendy, it seems, was the first person to see the straight line. So we'll come back to it, but definitely seems like if she was seeing the straight line, then the sun started to cut that straight path when it was rising to the east of her. Like, in order for her to see the straight line, the sun is directly over her head at midday, but she needed morning points to get the straight line, so the sun would have been out here somewhere. to give her those early morning points. So in the theory is it seems at least somewhere out here. And so really I should move this bar because this is well no okay this is indicating where people sighted it, so just keep that in mind though. So somebody sighted it here, but the sun was rising to give them that straight line. The sun was over, at least over here somewhere, and it could have been as far as over here, based on the witness we saw. And actually if you follow that backwards, the witness we saw in Australia, the same would hold true for them too, where the sun it's over their location at midday, but in order to give them the straight line at the end of the day, it would have had to be a couple 2 to 3 hour time zones to the west to give them the second half of their straight line day. So I think it's probably, it looks like the Creators International dateline is somewhere in here, and how that coincides, if at all, with what modern science is saying, we'll talk at the end of this list here. But there might be a little bit of there might be a little bit of a match that I'm seeing. There was definitely something odd with the fall equinox that I'm going to mention, but if you look at the spring and where things are tracking, it looks like there might be a correlation. But I would say probably no one should ever just hang their hat totally on what NASA is saying, timeanddate.com is saying, Naval Observatory, whoever they are. I mean, I think we can probably get a pretty good ballpark of where it's going to be in 2 to 3 time zones, especially after this spring. I think that's going to be really, we're going to be able to confirm it pretty good. But probably a good idea to always to know how to do this for yourself and to be ready to make the confirmation at your own location for yourself. Nothing beats making that confirmation for yourself. But I think it's probably, it's not going to be exact as what modern science is claiming. It might not be. Maybe it is, but we'll just have to continue to test this. I think we're getting closer to understanding it. But anyway, so Wendy in South Africa was the first one to see the straight line. And then as we continue to the west, I really prayed to the Creator that we would have more witnesses. And we did. We had a couple here in America. We had one in Tennessee and we had one in California that were just excellent. That came from Jill, and that came from Marty. And they had like 10 hours of data on. They got the day of the equinox and the day following the equinox with 10 hours of data and 9 hours of data. They like flip flop, but the data sets were excellent, very clear, and I gave them a solid green rating. So that's what it looked like. And then, I guess they were able to confirm the straight line and then also the flipped curve. And that's pretty much where data collection ended. Some people did submit more data, and that data is available. Like I said, if you click on the link, it'll take you to this directory. You drill down into the year, the month, and then you have the days to look at. So I just want to mention briefly what the interesting thing, what Stellarium was saying this year. I looked it up real quick, and it looked like it had the sun being bisected at a location right about here. And so that was odd to me, because if the Creators International dateline, I don't know. I just took a look at it, and it just, there's something wrong with it, and I think time will tell. But I'm seeing something fishy with it, and so they had it being bisected here. But if if Wendy was seeing it here, I don't know. I mean, there's an interesting discussion. Someone brought up the point that yes, the sun is crossing the celestial equator in a moment of time, but maybe we perceive the straight line as the sun is getting close to the celestial equator. So it's maybe it's not riding the celestial equator. Maybe it does cut through it, but it's so close to the celestial equator that when we measure it, the creator just designed it so it appears to be a straight line because it's just so close to the celestial equator. That's a possibility, I guess. So what that would mean is if Stellarium was showing it bisected here, then it would have had to be rising out here 3 to 4 hours to the east. But like I said, only time will tell, and I really got a feeling like I don't know. I got a feeling it's going to be interesting. What I'm seeing is really it would have jumped. Okay, so okay, now I'm remembering what I wanted to say. So the reason why it doesn't make sense is because if you look at where Stellarium says the sun was being bisected in March, it was right back here. I think it was over the bottom tail of Japan. It was central Australia is where Stellarium said the sun was being bisected. So what the software is doing is I think it's showing you where the sun would be bisected like half a year later, like exactly half a year later. But it's not, I think when the sun returns to that center line of heaven, it doesn't jump. It doesn't jump like this. Like this is just happening because of the way they calculated it. But I think it actually hits shortly after where it was the previous equinox, and that's hard to. I wish I could explain it better, but that time will tell. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. But that's what it seems like to me. And I think this spring it'll become clear what's going on. Because the weird thing is when you look at this spring. Here's the other thing: when you look at the spring equinox in Stellarium for 2025, I'm pretty sure it's showing it like here. So it does this flip-flop where in the spring it was here, in the fall it was here, and then all of a sudden in the next spring it's back here. But I think it should be like, okay, if it was here the previous spring, then it would be here in the fall, then it would be here in the following spring. It doesn't. I think this big half of the map jump is just a calculation thing in Stellarium, and it doesn't match what we were seeing with the sundials. I don't think so. We'll just wait and see. But I think the if you put aside the timing of the fall equinox for what Stellarium is saying, I think there's a possibility that these spring equinox timings are pretty close. I don't know if they're exact, but I do see the potential that they're close. So all that said, let's look at the data. And you can look at all this data. I am just going to show you the highlights. But thank you everyone again for what you collected. I'm going to show you the key ones. So this starts with Angie in on the 21st, 9 hours of data. This is pulled tight to the first morning point, or first and last points of the day, and you can see this obvious curve here. So pretty good witness. For me, moving on to America, West Virginia was the one where I pulled the line. So I had 10 hours of data. I recommend you watch the video from this day. There was some good testimonies of what happened this day. I wasn't expecting to be at this location, but I kind of failed at the other location, but the creator used it to show me this new location and this new setup, and it just worked really well. So I marked the first point of the day, last point of the day, and you can see these midday marks are off the line. So I felt pretty confident about that. We did have some other truth seekers collecting and learning, but unfortunately not enough to be conclusive. On the 22nd, there was jumping to South Africa. There was I'm gonna click on that. This was Wendy's data, 9.5 hours. She had the green marks. She did multiple days, red, white, and green, and so this looked pretty straight, all touching her straight edge there, 9.5 hours of data. So I was just hoping and praying we'd have more witnesses to confirm that, and we did. Got this data from Tennessee, and it's just 10 hours of data. There's a little bit of human error, I think, here that makes some of these a little above and below, but the average is it looks like it's these midday marks are pretty much here's one a little high, here's one a little low, but the average does look like a pretty good straight line. And the thing is, sometimes it is really hard to see the straight line. That's why it's just good to, if at all possible, to get all 3 days of data straddling the event, because the curve and the straight line, if you compare those 3 days, if you're blessed and able to compare those, you will definitely see a difference. There will be one day that looks straighter than any of the other days. So here's his data. 9 hours was pretty good, and he's using very fine points, which is excellent. That's what we need to be doing. We need to be very accurate with the tip of our shadow, but that just looked pretty straight. And we're gonna compare his data to the next day, and you're gonna see how the data jumps off the line. So yeah, I guess I will look at Angie real quick, because this is just an example. Unfortunately, she only had 3 hours of data, but if you look, it looks straight. And that's what will happen, unfortunately, all the way up to 8 hours. I've seen it happen where you don't get that early morning and late evening point, and this data by itself, the shorter spread of data, can look straight. So that's just something to be aware of as we all learn. So here again was a witness from Tennessee, and the following day, and so you can see I'm bisecting the pinhead there, and I'm bisecting the pinhead here, and as we look at the midday marks, they are off the line. That was with 9 hours of data, and then if we end with the Marty in California, he had an excellent data set. 10 hours of data, and you can look at this more closely yourself. He had a couple days of data with timestamps here, but I put this point on the line on the first point of the day and through the last point of the day, and when we compare, these are all well off the line. Like I said, he has like both days shown here. Like there's one from one day, there's one from the other day, but whichever one they are, all of them are off the line at this point. So I think that was pretty clear, 10 hours of data. So that's the summary. Stay tuned. I'm sure we'll think about this more definitely as we get like closer to the March Equinox event. Probably a week or a few weeks building up, where we'll start to take a closer look again at all of this. But feel free to let me know your thoughts. If there's any more new data come in, I'll try and do an update. Like I said, there was data that came in late from France last year that was just excellent and really helped at least to understand a little more clear where the international dateline was a little bit as far as this region of the world is concerned. But the other place I will throw any updated information to is this Facebook group, so feel free to check this out if you want to stay up to date with the latest happenings with sundial stuff around the world. And I hope you will join this important work. It is not too hard for you. We can do it. Don't listen to the lies of the devil when he says, oh, you live in the city or you live in the forest or you just don't have the time. We can do it. I've seen all the situations work. If people just take those steps of faith and start trying to do it, the Creator, he'll meet you halfway, and he'll show you the better. He'll reveal himself, and he'll help you to learn how to understand him and his ways better. So I guess that's it for now. Please let me know if you have any questions. Shalom, and may Abba bless you as you continually seek out his truths in love with a pure heart.